You've been listening to the True Idaho News Podcast. Unfiltered news and opinion for the citizens of Idaho. Get more true news by visiting trueidahonews.com. If you'd like to support this podcast, visit trueidahonews.com/support. Thanks for listening.
Good morning, everyone. I am here on True Idaho News. This is Shane Klass, and we have Senator Zuiderveld with us today. How are you doing, Senator?
I'm doing very well, Shane. And I just want to, before we get started and get caught up in all of the things going on in Idaho and in the U.S., I want to congratulate you and your bride on your marriage on Saturday. It was a beautiful wedding.
It was a beautiful wedding. So many people kicked in to make that happen. We didn't have to go find somebody to do the flowers. My mom did that. She did an absolutely beautiful job of it. My daughter, she did the snacks and the food the side parts of the food, as far as the snacky parts of it, and the cake. She made us a cake. It just did a beautiful job, and it was so much more special when people do that rather than just having to spend a bunch of money on all of it. So we were very blessed, and of course, my bride looked absolutely astonishing. So that made it even better.
It was beautiful. It was just fair. It's the way weddings should be, I think. Just filled with family, friends, and just it was comfortable. It was a nice wedding.
It really was. I couldn't have asked for any better. So, I mean, we've been together. The theme, although the theme of everybody speaking there happened to be, well, finally they got married. Finally. So it's for those that don't know, it's only been 12 years, and it was well overdue. And we were going to do this a couple of years ago, and it seemed like we've had 4 different venues that we were going to do the wedding at, and that suddenly didn't work out. So, and I won't go into all of it. It was a strange deal, but it ended up where it was supposed to be, and it was just, I couldn't have asked for better. So it was beautiful.
Yeah. Well, thank you for inviting us and letting us be part of.
Yes, thank you for coming. It was wonderful. Yeah. Absolutely wonderful seeing you guys, and of course Hilber was there, and I got to visit with him a little bit. I haven't seen Hilber for a while, and so it was good.
We're just all out there doing our thing, fighting for our state and for our country.
And the fight is just getting worse and worse, isn't it? I mean, it was we were just visiting just before the show about a little bit of the craziness going on, and Tom sent me over a picture. I think maybe we'll even start with this. We were going to start something new, something a little bit fun on Wednesday with Dr. Daniel Bobinski. And for those that tried to watch Wednesday, you'll notice we weren't here. When you're fighting the good fight, the devil is always against you. And we had quite a few important topics we were going to do on Wednesday, and we couldn't get the stream to work. Something that works every day, it's working today. It's just, for whatever reason, we couldn't get things to work that day. But maybe we'll just go ahead and start it today. It's called Headline Hit and Run. So the idea is just to pop across some different headlines, if you will allow us to do so, and just kind of talk about some of the craziness going on. First of all, I'm going to see if I can drag this onto the screen. This came out of Boise, and this is really interesting. It was during the No Kings protest. We can talk about No Kings and everything. But they are just coming right out into the open, and Tom just sent that to me, so I haven't even had a chance to digest this. Are you a communist? Revolutionary Communists of America is what I'm seeing there. Tell me a little bit more about that. What in the world? In Idaho?
Well, in Idaho. So actually, I've been digging into No King because I knew it was coming up. And I've also been digging into the Indivisible group that we have a chapter here in Twin Falls. And they're the ones that brought the No King into Twin Falls. They were the sponsor of that, along with our Chamber of Commerce that was actually promoting it, which I thought was interesting that they promoted No King. But these groups they don't hide anything. They are communists. They have a communist agenda. And when you go look at their websites, you can follow the money who's funding them. Indivisible, you could follow it to George Soros. You can follow, and they do not hide that they're part of the Communist Party. That is what their agenda is about, which I find ironic because no king, communist has, okay, they don't want a king, but they'll have a dictator,
Yeah.
which is a king. I'm thinking
Of the worst
you
kind.
can't make this stuff up. Yeah.
So, I mean, this is Idaho, and this is what people need to realize is that this is not a small movement. Now, granted, this is in Boise, and then there was another. I saw this. Somebody posted on X out of Coeur d'Alene. Says MAGA hates to see this. Thousands of people attending a No Kings protest in Big Red, Coeur d'Alene, Northern Idaho. Republicans counter protesters didn't even extend to half the numbers. But I mean, they're saying they all ran away when the Trump supporters. I mean, there's always going to be a little bit of back and forth about what was really going on there. But the truth is, I was a little bit surprised, I'll admit, at even what I saw here in Twin Falls. I didn't get to go out there. Obviously, I was getting married on Saturday. I wasn't out chasing down No Kings protesters to see how many there were. But looking at the pictures, there were a few hundred, and in Twin Falls, and
yeah.
And
Tom actually went to that. So we had a lot going on. It was funny. It was almost like a name of a movie. We had a funeral, a protest, and a wedding to attend that day. And so we kind of just divided up. And so Tom went, and because it was Flag Day, so he took his flag and he was able to witness what was going on there at the Capitol. And he says maybe a couple hundred were there, and then and it was just a sad, on the other side, the Patriot side, maybe 15. He said there wasn't a whole lot there. And but then as they were marching down to 5 Points, it probably grew to maybe 300 plus protesters along the way. And the night before, we were headed to an event, and of course, with all the construction going on and the roads being torn down, we had to go by 5 Points, and they were already out the night before. And I was taking a video of them as we are going by, mostly because I was wanting to see what their signs said. And so it was mostly going to just be for myself while I was doing the video, so they could see me as we were going around the corner videoing. And then towards the end, a gal just yelled out, F you. And I'm like, okay, well, now this needs to go up on Facebook, because here I'm just trying to, if you're going to protest, people are going to be videoing. But the fact that they did that, I thought, is this going to be peaceful? Are you, but you know what? It's rooted in bitterness and hate.
Yeah.
That whole movement. And I actually call it an exercise. I don't really think it was a protest. I think it was more of an exercise to see how quick can they get people to show up. A lot of them are paid. Tom even said that one of the license plates was out of a different part of Idaho. They weren't even from around here, because he followed them with their signs and seeing their license plate. And so we were just trying to get a feel. And Bill Cawley was even there taking pictures. And he says, I watched him on the crowd. He goes, I know a lot of people. I didn't know any of them. And you had the indivisible director or chairman, whatever you want to call him, from Twin Falls, who's actually going to be running against Clint Hostetler, Representative Hostetler, in District 24, that he's running. But he was there along with the governor, the Democrat governor, that they're going to primary our Governor Little against him, was there as well. But I have to say they were peaceful, but I have to give kudos to Sheriff Johnson.
Yeah.
Because he, and I'm just totally drawing a blank. Sorry, guys, it's early in the morning. He came out and did a press release saying that you will not.
Right.
We will be.
I saw that.
So he did some, proactive stuff to make sure that you will be viewed and watched. We are not going to allow you to deface anything, harm anybody, violate anything. He made a strong statement, and they were there in presence. So I think that's we just did a lot. The Twin Falls County did. So,
And that's a wonderful thing. I mean, Sheriff Johnson. That's my understanding is even when they were protesting, there were a police presence. Nothing got unruly and out of hand in Twin Falls. But that can't be said for around the nation. Unfortunately, there were shootings. There were all sorts of crazy things that were taking place. I guess that brings us kind of over to our next headline. So the shootings. What are your thoughts?
yeah. Wow. And you know what? I was so busy. I actually had received an email from our pro tem. This is how on top of it Idaho is. He sent us a thing out to all of the senators saying this is what's taking place, and we're going to take some measures to make sure that you guys are in the know and are protective on this. But from what I'm learning, so Minnesota had a really challenging session because they voted to basically remove healthcare from illegals. And she was one of the deciding votes on that. Um, and they came into her home and shot her and her husband. And then there was another representative, Hoffman. Him and his wife were shot, but they weren't killed, but they were injured. And that's what we're dealing with. They're always talking about, it's inhumane to take away healthcare from illegals, but I guess it's not inhumane to go into somebody's home and kill them.
Right. Right.
It's just really disturbing where we are as a country, that when you're trying to actually have laws, follow laws, then all of a sudden you're the enemy. But then it just kind of leads me to where we're at as a country. And Jesus pretty much told us that because of lawlessness, people's hearts will grow cold. So we are going to be dealing with lawlessness.
And and I was just reading the Bible this morning, but just a reminder, there's an overwhelming theme. I was even reading in Ephesians, just talking about the sexual immorality, and we have churches, so-called churches today that are in support of this LGBTQ movement, and they say that that we should embrace the trans community. And listen, I'm all for loving the sinner and hating the sin, but we have to speak out against the sin. It's very specific. It says we need to speak out against the sin. That it is we are to shine a light on it and bring it out of the darkness so that it can be dealt with. And there's so much of this going on around the nation, just absolute hedonism, lawlessness. But that is the future. That is the end times. That's where everything's headed.
Yeah.
But
well, you think of the days of Noah. He talks about it'll be like in the days of Noah.
Yeah.
Days of Noah, they didn't know God. There was lawlessness. There was all of the confusion of having homosexuality and all that different things going on in the days of Noah. And Noah was the only one righteous man at the time. And so, of course, God saved him and his family. But when we as a people refuse to go out and just shine light and share the gospel and the good news with people and allow them to continue in that, eventually God's judgment does come upon the whole world. And then we're going to be all caught up in that.
Yeah. Yeah. And while we're seeing it today, I think we're already caught up in it. It's, and you were talking about kind of with the illegal immigration problem, and maybe we should segue this back to Idaho a little bit. I know there have been some movements to kind of deal with that, but I have not been shy in my opinion that the way to stop this in its tracks is to, and I'm not happy with Trump right now. I'm not afraid to say that. With this idea of backing off on the hotels and backing off on hotel workers and backing off on the agricultural workers, they are the problem. If the only reason to come to America is because they and come in illegally is they know they can cross the border illegally and still get a job, or cross and get entitlements or get free health care. And so if it weren't for the freebies and it wasn't for the people who are willing to employ them, we wouldn't have to deport anybody. They would leave and they wouldn't be here to begin with. I'm of the personal opinion that there should be some strict consequences, if not arrests, on those who are employing them. But I don't see that happening in our state with our current governor. Any insights?
Well, I think that we've created our own problem, and now we're dealing with the circumstances of that, because, oh, we need to have them because nobody wants to work. Well, that's not true. There's a lot of people who actually really do want to work.
Mm.
But when you look at the illegal immigration, they could actually just pay a certain dollar amount to them. I guess you can call it slave labor. And I know they hate that, but they don't have to pay the same kind of wage and the insurance and everything, because they can actually come in and they know that they're going to get the health care. They know that they're going to get all of the benefits that the government's going to bring in. So they don't even have to pay for all of that. All they have to do is pay a wage. And then, and it's breaking the law. It's actually breaking the law. You go steal somebody's car, can you just say, well, I was really needing the car. I was really needing to get to work. So then they should just turn a blind eye to that law as well. It's lawlessness and it's illegal. And unfortunately, it's, our businesses here, they got caught up into that illegal behavior. It's like a bank robber. So a bank robber goes in and robs a bank, but they have a getaway driver. Well, the getaway driver isn't actually robbing the bank, but he's an accessory to that crime. And so that's what you have with our businesses here in Idaho. They're accessory to the crime because they have a need for it. And I'm thinking, well, we have a need to keep our laws, because now we're dealing with, I have to say it was about $800,000. It was a couple years ago when I did all this research, so don't hold me to it. But just in Idaho alone, the illegal immigration was costing Idahoans over $800,000. Just for a lot of that, and it's probably way higher than that. And it was broken down what it costs each taxpayer, and I can't remember what that was, but we're paying for that illegal behavior. And what country can you go into and go in and break their laws and go? It's difficult getting into different countries. You have to show a passport, you have to have a visa, you have to have all these different things. They're not probably real fond of you raising your American flag in their country. They're pretty strict with that, but yet we're very gracious and merciful in this country, which is good. But we also need to have laws. And then what happens is, well, I always give the example of when you allow certain people to break the law and other ones not. When you have children and you have household rules and you tell one child, you have to be in at midnight, your curfew's at midnight. Well, you don't tell just one, you tell all three of them they have to be in at midnight, but only one follows the rules and the other two don't. And then you don't do anything to the other two who don't break that are breaking that household rule. Pretty soon you have chaos in the home. They hate each other. They hate the parents. And that's what we're seeing people hating each other and hating the government because we're not upholding the laws that we have said that we put into place. And we're allowing certain ones to do it and certain ones to not. And so that's where we're getting a lot of that division and chaos, is because we're not upholding the rule of law.
Yeah, I was just looking here, and just a quick study said that a statement of purpose attached to a bill in the Idaho legislature estimates the cost of illegal immigration to the state, and this is Idaho, at $405 million.
Oh boy, I was way off.
So
yeah, it's not good. It's costing us a lot of money.
That's no small.
And then they always say, well, they pay taxes too. Well, I've actually worked for a few companies that hired illegals. Trust me, they make sure that they have like 100 kids on their I-9 so they can pay them very, and I'm exaggerating there, but they put as many children on there as possible so they're not paying that much in the taxes, and then they don't really file taxes. So, there is a burden upon the citizens of America. And then we're just saying, hey, American citizens, you would be better off if you were illegal. You would get more benefits. You would get better jobs.
Well, here's the Idaho Freedom Foundation touched on this. I'm going to see when this came out. This was in 2024, so it's fairly recent. It said that recently the leftist organization Idaho Center for Fiscal Policy reported on a national study that illegal immigrants contribute $72 million in Idaho taxes per year, and they pay taxes at a higher rate than citizens in the top 1%. But then they start breaking it down, and it says, but those not eligible for Social Security numbers pay taxes if they want to. Well, first of all, they say that you have to get an illegal Social Security number to begin with. And as they break it down, they came out that Idaho's state taxpayers pay a net $303 million to cover the cost of illegals and $405 million if you include the cost of their children beyond. So as they broke it all down, they are still a net loss to Idahoans. And I didn't get into that because I just now brought it up, but I do know this, that I heard somewhere that for every dollar that is paid out in wages, that dollar gets spent 7 more times in the state, in the area where it's spent. So if you give me, an Idaho taxpayer, $1,000, that $1,000 ends up getting, I take that money and I go pay for a local business. I buy something from them, I pay for their services, and then they in turn get to turn that around and reinvest it into their business and their employees, and then that employee gets paid, and so on and so forth. But when you take an illegal immigrant and you give him $1,000 and he sends 800 of it back to Mexico, that immediately is gone. It doesn't get spent anymore. It doesn't get spent with your local businesses. It doesn't get reinvested back into local workers, and then that money becomes tax money. That's revenue that the state gets to spend. I don't know if they're even accounting for that, but I know that is millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars that are leaving Idaho and the United States economy, and it's because these people are hiring them. It's their fault that this is happening. And they say, well, there's not enough workers. Well, it's a two-sided coin. I got an interesting idea. How about we start taking care of welfare and the people who are receiving entitlements that shouldn't be receiving them? And pretty soon when they get hungry, maybe they'll go take those jobs that they think are below them. But I'm just
and again, I always say too, when you go and you look at some of the industries that are hiring them in big numbers, a lot of times they will hire your locals, but they don't last very long there because it's really difficult when majority of the workers are illegal or legal, because some of them are legal. Hispanics, they make it very difficult because there's that language barrier and stuff, and then pretty soon they quit because it's hard to actually work, or they might make it difficult because they want their people to work in those industries, and that they're going to help support that as well. And so sometimes there's just so many different levels, and of that onion when you start peeling it back. It's not just because people don't want to work. They try to work, but it's a difficult environment sometimes. But I always say too, it would be interesting because they're always fighting we need to make them legal. Here we're going to, give them the ability to become legal citizens because they've been here working for different industries. But what's going to happen when they make them all legal? Will they strike? Because you know what, if all of a sudden that fear's gone, that they're not going to be deported, and they don't have that fear anymore, they're going to ask for a raise because they've been working, that they want more money. And then they realize that they can't maybe milk those cows. You can't miss not one milking. Those cows will, it's not a good situation. So all they would have to do once they became legal is to strike.
Yeah.
And they would have to pay them more and give them, because they wouldn't have the ability to milk all those cows. But part of the problem too is a lot of our industries have grown so faster than what Idaho's population really could help with. We're growing faster now, and with a lot of that, but a lot of the industries have just grown way faster than we had the ability to actually help with workers. We don't have that kind of population here.
Yeah, there has to be a balance too. I mean, we see this insane amount of growth that's happening in Idaho. But just drive around in Twin Falls right now and you'll understand the problems that are associated with that kind of growth. I remember being able to cross town from one side to the other in about 8 minutes, and now it takes about 4 times that long traffic, and then you have the weight on the infrastructure, and of course the illegals that are that aren't paying taxes and sending their money back to Mexico. Their kids are in our healthcare system, they're in our school system, they're driving, they're using the roads, it just creates a burden that everybody else is basically, we're subsidizing the milking industry, we're subsidizing agriculture, we're subsidizing the people that are hanging drywall, and everybody says, well, where are we going to get people to do those jobs? Well, guess what, guys? That's exactly what they said back in the before the Civil War. Well, who's going to pick the cotton? And it was the same group that was saying it too. It wasn't on the right. They weren't the Republicans that were saying that, but that's another story.
Yeah. Well, and and with ICE and what they're trying to do, what they're doing right now is they're basically taking the most of the harmful illegal, the ones that actually have crimes against them. They're not just going out to all these different businesses and loading up all of their workers. I haven't seen that anywhere yet. I haven't seen that, but what they are going to the jails and they're going to different areas and they're just basically taking those with a criminal record and shipping them back home. So it's, and we have to do something. Again, if we don't follow the rule of law, we will have chaos, and it will be our own destruction. We will crumble within like Rome.
So, speaking of numbers and money, you sent me over a document, shifting away from the headlines. Let's get into Idaho a little bit and dig into what you are the expert in our legislator. And
I don't know if I'm an expert, but I'm working on it.
But more than most, you're in the middle of it. You've got a tough job, because you went there with the attitude that I wish every one of our legislators would go with, which is to represent the people and to stop the crazy spending, to hold our government accountable, and to get us fiscally and morally back on track in Idaho. And I think that's pretty much from what I've seen, a good way to summarize what your intent is as a legislator. And part of that, you get to dig into the numbers. And when you start pointing out the numbers, the rest of the rhino and the establishment legislator doesn't appreciate that very much. And they make it difficult on you to do your job and to represent us, which you are a representative. You are there to represent us, and they are doing anything that they possibly can to stop those who are willing to actually represent the people. But you sent me some numbers. Do you want to kind of take me through this a little bit?
Well, I was want to give a little history and a little bit of background there. So our number one job is the appropriations. We are to set a budget and appropriate money for the state of Idaho. That is our number one job as legislators, to do that. And when I went in as a freshman year, and you have all this new stuff coming at you, and after I was finished with my freshman year, everyone asked, well, how was it? What shocked you the most about being what you've learned in that first year? And I had to say that I was shocked about our budget. I didn't realize where we were at, because everyone tells you, oh, it's fine, we're balanced, they just always want to make it sound like everything's just great. But when I was learning that half of our budget at the time was like 42%, we've lowered it a little bit, but 42% were dependent on the federal government that's broke. And so I kept on asking, I'm really concerned about this. How do we pay our budget when 42% of it is dependent on the federal government? When that goes down, how do we pay our bills? And so that was just a huge concern, and something that I thought we should start winging ourselves off of and figuring a way how we could be self-sufficient as Idahoans, where we don't have to depend on that when that ship goes down. And so going now, I was on JFAC this last session, and next, they put me on that committee.
Can you explain JFAC really quick, just for those who don't know?
Yes, JFAC is Joint Finance Appropriation Committee. And that is where you have 10 senators and you have 10 House representatives on this committee, and we go over the budget. And even when we go over the budget and we look at all of like the revenue come in and we look at what's going to go out, we see like a 10-foot deep view. I don't know how to word that, but we can see a little bit more than what most see. But there is still so much that like our advisors and our legislative services, they see in a deeper view of everything. And then they kind of give us a handful. It was like 800 and some pages of a budget book, which is a lot. But even then, it doesn't go real deep in what we're spending and how to keep things accountable. So when, which leads me to what has been happening in our legislative, and I think it's really important for people to know what you're looking at here. I actually just learned about this during a tour in Eastern Idaho. We talked about continuous spending. And what you're seeing here is 22, 21, 22, and 23 of continuous spending that we actually don't even legislate. That is just money that is being spent that the legislator has no idea what the revenues coming in and what the expenditures going out. We have no idea about this money. And so
by no idea, you mean so it gives it into a category, but what it actually gets spent on, you have no idea what those things are.
We have no idea. And then what they didn't, and I wanted to make sure I was clear when they were telling me all of this. I wanted to make sure that this wasn't absolutely no way part of our appropriations that we voted on. So we did a $13.9 billion budget. We'll probably spend about 12.9 billion, but we budgeted for about 13.9 billion. I said, I want to make sure all these dollars here, they're not included in that budget at all. I said, I really want to make sure I'm understanding that so that when I share, I can for sure tell everybody that this dollar amount is not included in that other dollar amount. And they said it's not included. So when you look at what we spent in 2024, if you go to the next one, and we'll kind of go back and forth, but if you go to the peach colored one real quick,
just see if I can get over
that
there real
shows
quick.
you the 2024 numbers.
If I can get down there, it's giving me a hard time. Here we go.
So when you look at the 2024 numbers, you will see that we have a 2.9 billion total. When you go to the very bottom, there's a $2.9 billion total there with all of those different agencies getting this money. And that is on top of our 12.9 billion. So when they say that we are spending $12.9 billion in what we've legislated, they're not adding in this 2.9. So our true budget isn't 12.9, it's actually almost $16 billion. And I think, to me, when you have that, they're not hiding it. They, that sits on our Luma program and it's there. But because I didn't even know about it, because that would have changed probably even more of my votes on how I allowed money come in, to knowing that there's actually another 2.9 billion that we're spending that we actually didn't appropriate.
Okay, how does that work? How does that get around the appropriations?
So they have made a policy, and I don't know the year. I'm doing some research on, because again, this is all new and I should have done this, but beforehand. But there's actually some policy that some of it can go into continuous spending. So when you look at like the lava hot springs, they bring in some money and then they're spending that money because they charge for you to go into the park and stuff like that. So there's a lot of that going on. But again, we look over everybody else that brings in money and their expenditures, but we're not looking at theirs. And so they made certain policy, I don't know when, that they can have some of this go into continuous spending because they're basically just taking care of their own. But there's no government oversight. So we have no idea how they're spending it, but they're still part of the government. I'm actually doing some research right now because I would like to reverse that policy where all this continuous spending will be over. The legislature will have oversight over this continuous spending.
Yeah, that sounds to me a lot like USAID. I mean, where you have these groups that are just given a whole gob of money and then they start spending it in places, and pretty soon you're like, well, why is our government paying for that? Well, you're not overseeing the people that you're just handing the money to, and they're spending it and nobody's looking at it.
And then they add certain ones and they take certain ones off. So when you look at the lava hot springs from 21 and 22, we're doing continuous spending, But then all of a sudden you look at 24 and it's gone. Well, I guess it's not gone. It's 3.5 million. I guess it's not gone.
Yeah, I was trying to bring that up real quick from before,
Yeah.
but yeah.
But anyway, it kind of comes and goes, and there's just different things. But if I want you to look at the legislature part on the 2024 one, all of a sudden we have legislative funds that's at $9 million.
What?
Yeah. Well, it wasn't there for 21, 22, and 23. And that was one of my questions when we were at the meeting in Eastern Idaho. I asked about the legislative fund. Why is that continuous spending? And why was it not in 21, 22, and 23? And all of a sudden in 24, there's $9 million. That's, who agreed to put it there? And $9 million, how is that being spent? So I actually have, I've been asking them to give me basically a profit and loss statement on that, because I thought, why not look at my own legislative branch, instead of pointing fingers at every other agency, let's look at the one that I'm part of. And so I'm asking them, can you tell me why it wasn't continuous spending in the previous years, but now all of a sudden we have 9 million in 2024? Who made that decision? Why is it there? What are we spending as a legislative branch, $9 million on top of what we appropriated in that $12.9 billion? And so that's where a lot of this, to me, is being deceitful.
Right. Yeah. You say, hey, we're it's like this fund over here can be used to suddenly say, oh, well, we saved the government a lot of money. We saved the taxpayer a lot of money because our budget's only $13 million, but we're over here. This is just fluctuating however it wants to. Nobody's looking at it. Nobody sees it. And it just, it's there, it's spending, but we don't know.
We have no idea what it's all about. So hopefully we'll look into that. And, and it's just interesting that I know a lot of them probably knew about that, because most of them that are on the JFAC committee have been there for, quite a while. And so they knew about this. And I just wish, because again, if they would have brought this up and showed all the different areas, you look at education, there was a $2.3 million that is in continuous spending. Well, that's on top of everything else. I probably would have said, you know what, if we have this here, then maybe we should start cutting back somewhere else. We should, but maybe they just didn't want us to see that, because then we would have voted against a lot of
well, that's like putting together a budget for your family, and you sit down with your wife and you go over everything, and you've got $5,000 a month coming in wages, and you say, well, we're only spending $4,900, but you didn't show her that $500 car payment on that new car you just bought.
Yeah.
And
that's basically,
what I'm seeing here. Yeah. And well, it's continuous spending. We have that bill every single month.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I don't know, when you look at it, and, and this is information that you actually can find on the legislative website. So anybody can see what I'm seeing. It's open to the public, but it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't given to us. And the excuse that was given to us is because our LUMA program that we have, that it's kind of like the QuickBooks program for Idaho, it's called LUMA. And so the state controller, who is to oversee that and make sure every expense is put in and every revenue that is put into that system. The system has been a nightmare. We spent millions and millions of dollars on this program, and it hasn't been user friendly. And they're working. We're spending more on it to try to get it, because we're so deep into this program now that we can't go to a different one without it costing even more. So this is a different way, but there's no way to see it. And they blamed LUMA for not having the ability to get us this information before the when we were during the session. They couldn't get this information for us. So was it LUMA? Was it not LUMA? It's hard to say, because when another example, and the reason why I question so much, I've experienced a lot of things. So with our revenue, we do a revenue forecast. And I was part of that committee to be on the revenue forecast. We spend a whole day listening to economists telling us what they're forecasting the next year will be. Should we raise our revenue up higher? Should we keep it about the same as the year before? What should we do? Are we going to, with the new president, with the tariffs, with all these things that he has planned? These are things that they take into consideration when they do our revenue forecast. And so when we were getting ready to vote on a revenue forecast, the governor gives what he suggests that we do. And then you'll have, like I said, all these different agencies from Idaho Power to Health and Welfare, colleges, they'll bring their economists in and they give us an idea of where it's at. And then they all kind of share what they think that we should go with. And then we decide individually on where we think that the economy will be the following year. I was with my decision on my number that I gave, I went just about 2% more than what we made last year. I thought, after hearing everybody's talk, I said, I thought, let's be wise and just do it a little bit. Well, we end up going about $400 million more than even what the governor was predicting. And a lot of it had to do with the Speaker of the House, Mike Moyle. And the reason why is they were wanting to give the income tax cut. So instead of giving an income tax cut because we lowered our budget, we gave an income tax cut because we raised our revenue forecast. Where we're at today is we are 2.9% above the revenue from last year, but we're 141% less than our revenue forecast that we said. And I said, this is dangerous, making a forecast so we can give an income tax cut. We should go in there and make budget cuts. What happens when we don't meet that? And I guess we'll figure it out, because if we're 141% below that prediction right now, being in June, we'll see what happens there. So then let's go over. So that's where you start questioning people's, wisdom, because it's all about.
Is it wisdom or is it motives? Because we are coming into another election cycle, and I know you can't. We're not to judge motives, and we're in dangerous weeds here. But you have to ask the question. When it doesn't make sense, there's a dollar involved. And in government, I've said, if it doesn't make sense, there's a vote involved. And we're coming into another election cycle. It sure would be nice for Mike Moyle to be able to say, oh yeah, I led the charge on getting you that income tax relief.
Yep. They're, in my opinion, it's always about the next election and what I've done. They always like to look at all the bills I've done, look at what I've done for you, what I've done, but they don't ever see behind the scenes of everything. And I just want to share with everybody that when one person's out there saying, look what I've done, well, they couldn't have done it without the 105 of us.
Right.
If they got a bill passed, it wasn't because they did it all by themselves. It took us having that majority to get it passed. So it's a team thing, but they get that's part of that reelection thing. Look what I've done, but I always say, but you needed us to do that. And so when you look at another,
it's like the pitcher saying that he carried the whole team. Well, look what I did. It was my pitching. My pitching won the game, and it won the entire season, and it had nothing to do with the rest of you.
Yeah, we didn't need you, the catcher over there, to get that person out over there. But it takes a team of people. But that's where you get a lot of pride and egos start happening when you get to the Capitol, and it's all about looking what I've done instead of. And sometimes, we're writing a lot of bills too that actually, we've seen that where we write a bill, but nobody actually follows the law. And so, we're wasting a lot of time. So we waste a lot of time trying to bring bills and they don't even follow it. And so, I think we need to slow it down a little bit. So boy, I'm all over the place. There's so much to share with all of you guys.
Well, you and I have talked, and there is so much, and we'll have you back to keep kind of digging into different bits and pieces as we go along. But one question that I have is you're bringing up all of this. You're bringing up the corruption. What kind of is this? Or corruption, or just, important questions like, hey, what about this other $3 billion over here? Is this being met with open arms and saying, hey, we ought to be looking into this, or are you getting resistance, and what kind of resistance and why? What's their excuse?
Um, there is some resistance, and yeah, there is some resistance. There's a lot of isolation, I guess, and a lot of, trying to explain, like even with the water situation, because we voted against the water appropriation of $30 million. And right away, they do a lot of gaslighting, I guess you could call it, where they're like, she voted against the water, she voted against the water. And they don't realize that there's all this money that we have sitting in a lot of water projects that is just sitting there, which I understand you have to have some money ahead of time to get the projects going. But some of these projects have been going for a long, long time. And again, then there's not a lot of oversight. We have really no idea where that 30 million is going to go. Is it going to go to cloud seeding for an aquifer? Is it going to go for redoing different areas? We don't really have any oversight. And yeah, we have to trust, but at the same time, when you start seeing some of the things that they do, you start losing some of that trust in there, and we don't have a lot of oversight there. And so that's where they start pressuring you and saying you're against water, you're giving away our water. And so to kind of put that pressure on you so that you could, vote for it next time. And so I actually had voted no. I told them up front that I would vote for all of the maintenance budgets. That is to keep your lights on. That's what they kind of how they explain it. This is what keeps Idaho going. So we have 10 of those budgets. And I voted for all of those except for the health and welfare one because it's completely bloated and I just couldn't get myself to vote for that one. So I voted for the other 9, but not that one. Let them know ahead of time that it was going to do that. But as we started doing the other appropriations, that is like the wish list, kind of what this is the additional asks for the state. We started doing those bills, and I was voting no on all of them because it was adding on more full-time employees. It was growing our federal, dependency. It was growing our state budget over, 1.9%. And so we kind of had these standards that we had set for ourselves that there's 8 of us, and they've given us the name of Gang of 8. But anyway, we worked together. We thought we need to keep each other accountable. And how are we going to keep each other accountable during these difficult decisions on our budget? So we set us some little guidelines that we were going to follow that we could explain to our constituents. This is why we voted no against that. So being the only one that is on the JFAC committee, I get to be the no vote first. So I'm voting no on a lot of these appropriations because they don't meet the standards that we had set. And most of the time it was 1 to 19, 1 to 19. Occasionally we started getting some more that were voting no along with me. But a lot of the votes was 1 to 19. And so I was taking in to the office and asking me why I'm voting no. And they didn't realize that I was going to vote no on everything, which I did tell them ahead of time that I would vote no on a lot of these appropriations if it didn't meet the standards there. And they says, well, I thought it was just going to be on moral issues why you were voting no. And I says, well, to me, appropriations is a moral standard. Are we going to be a slave to the lender? We need to have we don't spend more than we have. We don't borrow. I said that's kind of a moral issue for me.
It's that Rhino double speak.
Yeah, and they says, well, if you keep voting no, you can't carry bills on the floor because they only allow those who vote yes in the committee to carry them on the floor, because we won't be pushing the people, the other legislators to vote for it if we're the ones voting no. So you don't get to carry the bill there. And so they says, well, if you don't vote yes, you won't be carrying any of the bills on the floor. And that puts more strain on the rest of the committee. And I says, that's not my problem. I says, that's not what I'm here for. I'm not here to make their life easier. I'm actually here to make my constituents' life easier. And that's part of me voting no, because they're hurting out there and we're just spending money like we're printing it.
On
And
that,
so you do get the pressure. So I
yeah.
got a lot of pressure there. And they says, well, what's your, what would you like to see happen? And I said, personally, I says, let's vote for the maintenance bills. And I says, and let's put a hold on all the other ones that we can do a deeper dive into, and not something quick, because you don't really have the time to dig in deep the way we should be really looking into these other ones, and just put a hold on that. If we were able to run on this 12.9 billion the year before, we should still be able to do that in 2025. And then let's go look into that. Let's not add any more. Let's just say, here's the maintenance budget. We don't need any of these other bills right now. We're going to look into. I said, that's Glenn's perfect world. I think that would be wise and important for Idaho, but we can't do that. So so there is a lot of pressure there. They don't like it. So, but I'm not there to be, the most popular. I'm not there to do what they want me to do. I'm there to do what the people, I'm there to represent the people and fight for the people.
Well, and that's what you should be doing. And I apologize that I'm not on the screen right now. I'm trying to cover up because I'm trying not to call anybody out specifically a name. But this goes right along. So I spoke on this on my show here a week or so ago about an exchange that I had with somebody who's kind of on the side of those who are trying to get the gang of 8 out. Is the best way I know how to say it. They don't like the accountability. They don't like people looking in and digging in, and I had an exchange. But you were talking about you can't get your name on a bill, and you're not doing anything. But I think this is the game that they're playing, Senator. I said that I'm not loyal to anyone. She says you're loyal to who you've been told to be loyal to. The legislators you feature are puppeted by DC lobbyists and can't even get simple memorials through the state house, and accuse me of being a propaganda arm to their media garbage and justifications for no impact, and then told me that I'm isolating myself from every other representative by entertaining you folks. And so this was a scathing look into, I believe, what they're going to try to do coming into this next election cycle is they create a system where if you hold the line for the people and you hold them accountable and you don't vote yes on the bills that the establishment, want to push through, that we're not going to stick your name on any bills. And so you're not going to get anything passed. We're just going to make sure that you don't get your name on anything. And I've already heard the stories where they're taking somebody's name off. They did this to Christy Zitto, took her name off of a bill and then ran it through so that they can come back in the next election cycle and say, well, you didn't do anything.
Mm-hmm. And and that's what people don't see. I always say when you go to the Capitol, to me, it feels like high school on steroids. You have a lot of personalities there, and then it becomes more about personalities than it does about policy and about serving the people. And we did have that, and a lot of it started when we were wanting to deny our pay raises, our pay increase of 22%. That's when a lot of it really started. And because we were pushing the resolution to stop that, which is also an Idaho GOP platform as well, that we were to deny our pay increase until we could bring down our budget. That was part of what the Republican Party was wanting us to do as well. And being the Senate liaison, we thought, well, let's lead that. And we got it passed through the Senate. But there was a lot of behind the scenes things happening with that, because they did not want it on the House side, done at the House side at all. So when we got through the Senate, they brought it through on the House side, and it went through Ways and Means, which is the Speaker's, I guess you would say, his committee, that if he wants something through or something to die, it always goes through the Ways and Means. And so 7 a.m., Representative Kent Marmon is presenting that, saying that we're going to deny our pay. And they did I say Senator Marmon? Representative, not Senator.
Representative. Yeah.
Representative Monks, he was asking a lot of questions, trying to get some gotcha questions on it. And it ended up, and then Speaker Mike Moyle was also in the audience, making sure that they followed through with what we're supposed to do. And Representative Jaron Crane was the only one that voted to send it to the floor for us to reject our pay raise. The rest of them did, even including the House liaison for the GOP party, Josh Tanner. He voted to give ourselves a pay increase. And so it just really got ugly. And because of that, then all of a sudden our names would not see the light of day on any bill. If our names were on that bill, we wouldn't, be able to get them through. And so again, it was just a way of gaslighting and silencing us. And here we were just trying to do what not only our constituents, but the Republican platform was calling us to do.
Can I just, for the listener, think about this for a minute. You vote for a representative to represent you, and really think on this, what this means. You vote on a representative to represent you, the voter. In the Magic Valley, we put a lot of these people that are in this, what they're calling the Gang of Eight, in there. And I'm personally offended by this because we put them in there to represent us, but then they tell them, because you voted against a pay raise, we are going to silence that legislator. That means that they are silencing you, the voter who sent them to represent you. Now, how corrupt and disgusting is that? This makes me mad. This is one of the things that gets under my skin. Because you didn't vote the way we wanted you to on this one idea over here, we're going to screw everybody who voted for you for the remainder of the legislative session. There is nothing that stinks of corruption worse than that one. And I've heard this over and over again, and it just makes me mad that they're doing this. It makes me mad on your behalf, Senator, but it makes me mad on behalf of the voter who put them there even worse. And what they're hoping is that they can convince you, the voter, to vote against them the next time because they didn't get anything done. It's all the reason we need to put them back there and keep putting them back there until they start listening to the voters. And we need to get rid of the people who are corrupt, who won't let anything fly through just because they voted against a pay raise. In a time when we have tariffs going up, and these are necessary things that are happening. I'm not against what Trump's doing with the tariffs. It's necessary. But it means we all have to pull our belt a little tight, including the legislator.
Amen.
Sorry, that's my soapbox for the moment. But
it was on principles for us. When we just finished a really hard campaign. I mean, and when you're out there knocking on doors and you're in front of people, you see that they're hurting. I mean, you had people moving back in with parents, or parents moving in with children because they can't afford to live in their own homes anymore. And so you see that the inflation was killing them. And not one person, I kept on asking, anyone out there that does not work for the government, tell me when was the last time you got a raise and if it was 22%? And then there's the excuses. Well, you guys don't make that much money anyway. It's only $19,000. But again, that's what our pay is. What we actually get every, for the year is $19,000. But no one sees the per diems and everything else that we get that equals almost about $40,000. If you look at what if you add in our per diem and everything, and we have expenses out of that. But so does a person who doesn't work for the government. They get a paycheck of $40,000 and they still have to pay out. So we still have to pay out of that. But when you look at all the money that we make on that, it's about $40,000. And so, we're not going to be completely transparent. It's only $19,000, and this isn't. And I think where it's headed is they really would like us to be a full-time legislature.
Yeah, and that's a bad
dangerous
thing.
That's a
dangerous path to go down.
I'm telling you, citizens, you do not want us there full-time. And then, but to me, they says, well, when we get home, we have a lot of work to do. That's what we signed up for.
So do school teachers. My mother was one, and I watched her grade papers until 9 or 10 o'clock at night every night, putting together lesson plans for the following day.
Yeah, every other job has that, where they're doing work, when they're not at work. But that's what we signed up for, and if we're truly about going and fighting for our country and fighting for our state, we need to have the attitude that we're going to give up our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. That's part of our duty of what we're doing. So if I don't get more money doing this, that's part of me giving up my life and my fortune there, is to basically say, I'm going to fight for our state. That's what I signed up for. And when it starts becoming about money and I need more money to do this, and they says, well, then we will only get the rich to run for office. That's false. That's false. You look at our representatives here in Magic Valley. You have Representative Hostetler, you have Representative Levitt, you have Senator Cole, and you look at Senator Zito, Representative Faye Thompson, and Representative Kim Marmon, and Representative Lucas Kaler. All of them either work jobs or are retired or single. None of us are rich, but we are there doing the very best we can in the abilities that we can. It is not about money, and people who really have the heart and want to run will run, and which I'm encouraging people. You should really consider running. If you don't like it, if you don't like what's going on, be part of the solution. Don't be part of the problem. Go out there and see if you can run in, anything from school board on up. But, it's not about the pay. When it becomes about the pay and about the power and the prestige, then you no longer have representation.
Right. You brought up the GOP platform and the Idaho GOP platform, and I brought it up just to kind of glance at a couple things. I want to read A through F under fiscal responsibility, because this touches exactly on what you were saying. It says the Idaho Republican Party recognizes that all government is financed by taxing its citizens. We believe the size and cost of government, as well as the national debt, must be reduced. We believe in a balanced budget and support congressional action to pass a balanced budget amendment. We believe the growth of government is unnecessary, and has a negative impact on both the conduct of business and our individual lives. We endorse the review of all government programs. I find this interesting. That's exactly what you're doing, and getting resistance on, and encourage their assumption by private enterprise where appropriate and workable. Programs which are outside of government's constitutional obligations, not cost effective, or have outlived their usefulness should be terminated. Well, if you have these ongoing expenses that just keep going and going and going that they're hiding from us, those are right in there that should be terminated. And then it goes on to say, we expect the government entity which mandates a program to provide the funding for its implementation. And then lastly, we believe the state legislature should appropriate funds only for purposes and to the extent required to meet government's constitutional obligations. Any current programs, functions, or activities of government that are not required by the Constitution should be repealed, defunded, and left to the private sector. And you're talking about giving yourself a raise, and I go right immediately to the first part of that. It's in Article 1, Section 1, fiscal responsibility. We recognize that all government is financed by taxing its citizens, and that the size and cost of government, as well as the national debt, must be reduced. How can you do that when you're playing games and pretending like this money doesn't exist, that it's not being spent, and it's being tucked away over here? And when you're giving yourselves raises during a time when it's hard, when the citizens are already through inflation and through just changes in market and everything else going on. I'm in the building industry. We do home theater and home automation, and we are really, a lot of the people moving in here is what funds us. Well, right now we're seeing a massive reduction in that. It's tight on us. We're having a hard time making it from one check to the next. We're getting there. I mean, we're not living on the streets, but we're not living flagrantly either. And when I start seeing our government say, well, and I live better than a lot of people that I know. And so I look at them, dear friends that don't make what I make, and I'm struggling, and I think, man, our government is increasing their own wages right now while we're just, I've got friends that don't know how they're going to make it next month. This is ridiculous. And then they're going to hold you accountable, Senator, and not let you pass any bills because you voted against that pay raise. And they're going to make it look like you're not doing your job. It's disgusting to me. I'm still back there, and it goes against everything that the Idaho GOP platform stands for.
And you know what? And it goes against, as an American citizen, It goes against that. That is not how we were founded. But Shane, but I want to remind everybody, we have grown our government to where Idaho the Idaho government is the largest sole employer in the state of Idaho. And that
That's
creates a lot of problems.
terrifying.
So we have created all these positions that should actually be free market positions. We should actually, I call Idaho Corp. I feel more like I'm a company man for Idaho Corp, because we're always, it's always about giving the employee pay increases, and not only did our pay increase, most of Idaho government workers seen a 5% up to a 22% increase, just like ours, depending on what agency you were with. They have all, because we set that precedence of increasing our wage, we've seen the 5% and higher on government employees. Well, how many, if they're the number one sole employer, the individuals who don't work for the government are the ones that are bringing in that money to pay them. But yeah, they turn around and help pay their own wage. But we need those that are outside of the government to bring in that money to pay for all these government workers. You can't keep growing that and think that we're going to stay afloat. But here's the other part of the problem, and the reason why they will not vote against a lot of these appropriations that grow this money is their voters. So if they're the number one sole employer of the state, they're most likely going to vote for the one that actually voted to give them that pay increase.
Right.
And they have an influence probably at least on 10 people. And so that's the reason why, we have a struggle, and it's hard to get those in that are willing to say no. And I always say it's no right now. Maybe next year we might say yes if we have it. But just because we have checks in our checkbook doesn't mean that you can go ahead and just write all this money. You don't have the money. Yep. And we're getting to the place where when you're like right now, this year, we're 39% dependent on the federal government. And when those programs stop, we don't know how to pay for them, which brings up another topic. When we were doing the appropriations this last year, we actually had on health and welfare that President Trump was doing an executive order to stop one of the health and welfare programs, funding it, which caused a stir within the agency. And I kept on asking, well, what happens when that money goes away? What are we going to do? And they says, well, no money, no program. And I said, makes sense to me, which that's the way it should be. But I says, that's not easy for us legislators. We still have to answer to 55,000 people that are in our districts. Right. We still have to answer to that. And I says, and we should have been, I've been asking this 2 years before. Shouldn't we start getting ourselves off of that so we're not faced with these situations that we are? So in a lot of our appropriations, it actually has wording in there now that says that if the federal defunds that, the program is done, the state is not responsible for it. So, phenomenal. What are we going to do? But you know what? I do have faith in people. When you start getting hungry and you're needing that, people are going to start figuring out how to make sure that they're not going hungry, which is going to make them healthier because they're going to be working. So
it's kind of like the biblical principle between the man and the wife, and in the Bible it states that a lot of husbands, and I want to remind you that there's more to this verse where it says that the husband is the head of the household, is the head of the wife. But if the husband doesn't spend time listening to the wife and treat her as that equal, and he's making all the decisions without listening to her, he also shoulders the responsibility for every single one of those decisions that they make. And in our legislator, I want to remind those who are ignoring that are trying to hold down the voices of the Gang of Eight, that you've called them the Gang of Eight. If you're going to hold them down and you're not going to listen to them, and you're not going to let them put their name on any bills, and you're going to push them away, and also, by the way, you're ignoring the will of all of the people who voted for them and put them there, you're responsible for the mess that this state's in. That's on your shoulders. You're going to make it sound like it's their fault. They're going to try to do that in this next legislative session. But at the end of the day, if you're shutting them out and you're not listening to those voices that are saying, hold up a minute, maybe we need to slow down our spending, Maybe we need to look at some of this stuff as discretionary and not as that it has to be there. Then the mess we're in is on your shoulders, and we, the people, are going to hold you accountable in the next election cycle for it.
They do. And and the power is within the people. We do have a beautiful system. We don't have a king. We have a
That's right.
constitutional republic where the people actually vote in who they're going to want to represent them. I always say that I'm your employee, because
Yeah.
when I go out and I'm campaigning, I'm doing a very long job interview with 55,000 bosses. That's because I'm trying to convince you to hire me to go do the job that needs to be done. But they part of it, they forget about that we're a constitutional republic, not a democracy. It isn't a
Yeah.
mob rule. We still have our constitution that sets the base on how we're to vote. Just because everybody thinks they should get a free bicycle and everybody votes for that, that doesn't mean that we have the responsibility to pay for them to get a bicycle, because our constitution doesn't state that. We're still a constitutional republic. But a lot of people have forgotten that as well, and again, we have to start educating, and we haven't received that in our education system. But part of it too, as an adult, you don't get to blame the education system. You can actually go pick up your constitution. You can actually read it. You can go read books like, the original intent of our government. You can read the Federalist Papers. You no longer get to blame the education system.
Yeah.
You know how to read, you know how to comprehend. It's important for you to go and read and know it. And be part of it. And we're not the savior. Everybody calls up wanting us to fix the problem. Well, to fix the problem, a lot of times is for us to grow the government. This is what's happening. And I said, well, you do realize that by doing that, I'm going to have to grow government, because we're going to need more full-time employees. We're going to have to spend more money on those full-time employees. We're going to have to probably start a whole nother agency for that. So, we have to get back to where the government has specific defined duties.
Right.
We don't get to, if somebody brings in their car into a shop and they said, I want you to rotate my tires, that shop doesn't have the right to go in there and put in a new radio, a new windshield, maybe redo the engine. Just because they didn't say that, they don't have the right to go in and do that. All they have the right to do is to fix those tires. And that's where our Constitution is. We don't get to go and just do whatever just because it's not stated in that Constitution. Only thing that we can do is what is stated in that Constitution.
Correct. And this comes down to the problem that we see in America all the way across, is that men are not being men. And what we need to get back to, and we just had a sermon on this on Father's Day yesterday, is that we have the charge to be men, to act like men. That means not only being the head of the household, but also being the protector of your family. And how can you protect your family from the government if you're not paying attention to it and you're not participating in it? Mm-hmm. One of the biggest factors in our freedom has to do with what our government's doing. Are we allowing them just to take away freedoms? Are we outsourcing things that we ought to be doing ourselves to the government because we're just too lazy to pay it to deal with it as society, and churches aren't doing their part? And I've got this real heart now that what we need in areas like Twin Falls is we need a group of men that starts getting together. And I'm going to be praying about this because God put it on my heart yesterday, and I'm just going to pray about this even more. But we need a group of men who, if Glanbia goes in there and gives a whole bunch of money to Pride, why don't 100 men show up and knock on their door, and not coming in being mean, not coming in being rioters, but knock on the door and come in and sit down with them and say, why are you doing this to my community? Mm-hmm. And when our legislator isn't doing what they're supposed to, why aren't 5,000 men walking down to going down to Boise and sitting outside that Capitol and walking into our Senate and saying, you're going to listen to us?
Exactly. Or
we
go
used
down
to do
the Chamber
that.
of Commerce. Yeah. Go down to the Twin Falls Chamber of Commerce and say, why did you promote this No Kings for the indivisible group that is about communism? Do you realize that's going to destroy the very businesses that you guys are representing in the Chamber of Commerce?
Yeah. And by the way, Twin Falls chamber members, yes, you did do that. Yes, you allowed them to become members of the chamber, and then they promoted that on the calendar of the Chamber of Commerce. What just happened this weekend? If you didn't like what happened this weekend, you ought to be on the phone with the Chamber of Commerce in Twin Falls. And I will tell you this: the current president of the Chamber of Commerce is not happy that happened, but at the end of the day, it's still on his shoulders.
It's no different than me. I don't like a lot of things, but it still comes back on my responsibility. That's what I was put in this position for. And we do have to, and I just have to say, from a woman's perspective, we do need the men. We are created so different, yet we can have a lot of Deborah spirits where we're out there fighting and being good judges. And of course, that's Deborah spirit is in Judges in the Bible, in the Old Testament, for those who don't know. But there's a lot of women that actually can go out there and do a lot of it. And I look at me and I'm doing a lot of stuff, but I can tell the difference between the men. We're created differently. You're created to be that protector, provider. You are actually the ones that go to war. We're created to be more of the heart, and because we're kind of getting out of sync. And if the men don't raise up and do what God's calling them to do, he will allow the women to come up and to do that. But I'm telling you what, we debate differently. Because ours is more of the heart. We're more of the nurturing spirit.
Yeah. And sometimes you need the scary guys showing up at your door saying, we're not going to put up with this.
Mm-hmm.
Do you understand? We're not putting up with this. And men need to rise up and do. We used to do that. Historically in America, that is what happened. Is when the government got out of control. Remember the Tea Party? Mm-hmm. I mean, everything along. You look in history, and it was when men stood up, the government listened. Yeah. And the men are not standing up. We're not rising up and saying, no, you're not. You haven't been listening to us. And you need to remember who your employer is. You need to remember you're only allowed to be a government because we allowed it with our Constitution. You're only there by our graces, and we can take you out. And they're not doing it.
And you look at the media and everything. You look where men are at. We have been pushing them down through media. Oh, you can't. The women, have been trying to push the men down. And you look at media saying, it's not good for you to go out there and be that strong, courageous bull man, just saying this is, how it is. The media is always trying to make it look like the man needs to stay home and take care of the children, or they're always downplaying men and trying to make them be less than. They've been pushing them down, and we're seeing that. Men, a lot of men, they won't speak out because they don't want to be attacked, which I understand that. I mean, it's not fun. It's kind of being with that nagging wife all the time. It says in scripture that they would rather put themselves on the corner of the roof of the house than to be with a nagging woman. Well, if you have that nagging media all the time, they're going to go put themselves in the corner of the house, because they're not going to want that all the time. But, it's time for them to rise up, and I will 100% get behind all of that. When you have that order, God is a God of order. He's not an order of chaos. And because we're not staying within that order, we're seeing the chaos. Mm-hmm. There's a reason why he put the man and then the woman and so on, because of the way he's created us. And when we stay in that order, not only do we not have chaos, but we're strong. That doesn't make women less than.
No, not a bit.
At all. I mean, because we add so much value to the. If the man didn't have that wife to protect and those children to protect, you wouldn't see that so much. And maybe that's where we're at, because a lot of, people are not getting married and having children anymore. But men are motivated by that love for their wives and their children. And so when the wives and that come up there and help them, man,
part of what's made me the strongest and best parts of me come from the days, and I know a lot of you guys out there can understand this. There's days it'd be easy just to say, man, my work is hard, life is hard, everything around me is just tearing me down. I think I'm going to stay home and stay in bed today. And then you look over and you see, I got a wife, I got kids that depend on me to get out of my bed and go to work. It's what motivates us to push and to thrive when we may not even feel like it ourselves, when we just want to give up. That's part of what makes us strong. And that's the part that makes us strong, is the willingness to do that. God gave us that strength. God gave us that desire to be the protector, to be the provider, to be the one that does that. But at the same time, the reason that we don't put the baby's head under the water is because we got the wife over there that has that nurturing spirit that can handle the cry constantly, never ending. And I say that figuratively, okay, before anybody thinks that of me. But that is the truth.
Yeah, everybody knows that. But and then too, and as the wife, our job is so important to encourage that in our husbands. To appreciate what they're doing, to make their load lighter as they're going out there and battling all this. That's part of our duty as a wife, is to make sure that you're out there, you're getting all the arrows and the bullets from everything coming at you. And it's time. And then when you come home, it's our job to help nurture you back. That's part of our job.
Oh,
and you're not seeing a lot of that
I have to tell
in
you,
our society anymore.
I have to. That's one of the biggest things. This last week, I was going through pictures for the wedding, and remembering I had a sister. She was 23 years old 6 years ago or so, that committed suicide, and it was rough. I had to go to Arkansas with my sister and my mom, and we went there and had to go through all of her stuff and clean out the house and get it ready to put on the market and those things. I came home absolutely defeated. And when I got off that airplane, Rhonda just looked at me. She didn't have to say a word, just ran over and just put her arms around me and just pulled me tight. And that moment, it's just like all of that weight just came off. And that is so important to have that support network there back at home. But that's what women are. They are the nurturing. We go out and we deal with the stuff we don't want to deal with, and we have that strength to push through. But at the same time, it's so necessary to have that balance. And without it, we wouldn't be the men that we are. We'd be tyrants, frankly. But.
And that to me is a simple fix. Yeah. We have gotten away from how we were designed. And because of that, we're seeing where we're at as a state and as a nation. We're seeing all of the transgender confusion. We're seeing our education system the way it is. We're seeing that we can't really, truly balance a budget. We're spending above our means. And to me, it really is rooted right back to that and how God created the family. And we and isn't it interesting, we actually passed a resolution, which my name wasn't on that, but my vote counted. I was actually wanting to be a co-signer on it, and I was kind of denied being a co-signer. But
this is ridiculous. Go ahead.
It is. But I still, just because of that,
Childish.
That doesn't change the fact that I'm going to be voting on this. But we made it where we are celebrating the family from Mother's Day to Father's Day. The mom, and the debate on that. Like, he says, well, just because there's two dads or two moms, there's still a family. And we're like, no, you have your month. You get the whole, you get almost a year anymore. But this is to celebrate a mom and a dad as it was designed to be. And so we celebrate that from Mother's Day to Father's Day. We just went through that whole month of celebrating that. But did you see that in the media anywhere?
Oh, of course not. Of course not.
You don't. And then they want to silence us because they said, well, that's not being inclusive. Well, it really is the pride inclusive, because they're not including. They like to downplay the husband and the wife. So they're not inclusive either.
That's correct.
And so but you don't hear about that. And again, that's part of going back to the days of Noah. But if you look at that, I think that is the whole destruction of our country. I think that what we're seeing is because men are not taking their roles seriously and respecting them, and women are not taking their roles and respecting them. And here we are. we're in a country of chaos.
And that's a full circle of, I was going to try to bring it right back around. I'm glad you said that, because that's exactly what I was thinking. Bringing this conversation that we had about men and their role in the family, that is bringing it back to the government. And what we're here at True Idaho News and with Senator is that because men have given up their responsibilities to the government to provide, we got a lot of men out there that shouldn't be on welfare, that ought to be out working. Get off your butt and go to work, because that's your responsibility, not mine.
Mm-hmm.
Not my responsibility to pay for it through the government to you to go sit on your hindquarters so that the government can pay for it. It's your job to get off your butt and go to work. And you'll feel better. You'll feel more manly. You'll feel more like you are in your role, doing what you're supposed to be doing. But also to protect our families and shield them from this kind of pride garbage that's going on in your community. If you would stand up and speak out against it, go to the businesses. Go down to St. Luke's and tell them how mad you are that they're supporting pride parades. Go down to Glanbia and tell them how mad you are that they supported it. Go down to Micron. Go to these businesses. Stop giving them your money. They're using the money you give them to pay for this stuff that is against the family. It's your responsibility, men, to be the leaders in the community and stand up and speak out against it, and then not to spend your money on it. But you can't spend your money on it if you're not working. But you're supposed to protect your family. You're supposed to be out there working and providing for your family. And you're supposed to be involved in government to make sure that the government is going to still be there to support your family in the future the way that they're supposed to, which is to stay out of your lives as much as you can keep them out of your lives. We have given up our responsibility as men. And until we stand up, this ship isn't going to set itself right. It's your fault, men. It's yours. It's ours. And we need to accept that. That's the first step in healing.
And women, get out there and encourage your men, be right there with them, and I always, there's an example of an ox team that I had read. I can't find it again. I've been trying to find it, because it's talking why they pair a male ox with a female ox instead of male or female. They pair it with a female, because they actually pull more weight when it's a male female. And the reason behind it in this thing I read is because the male wants to relieve the pressure, the yoke of the pressure from the female ox, so it pushes harder. And then the female, because she is seeing that, she wants to relieve pressure from the male, and so she pushes harder to the point where they're carrying almost 3 times the amount that they could do individually. And because the male is wanting to relieve the pressure from the female, and then the female's trying to relieve the pressure from the male, to the point. And if we were to do that as husband and wives, or just even male, female, Amen. If we were to have that kind of attitude where I want to help make your life easier, so I'm going to push harder, then you're going to push harder, because you're going to think, well, she's working so hard. I need to work harder.
That's right.
If we were to do that, can you imagine? America would be great again.
Yes, it would. It comes back, but that's the circle that comes all the way back to the family. The family is at the core, and a properly structured family is at the core of fixing America. When you see him talk about it, I don't need to get into this argument. We're kind of running out of time, but when in the Black communities, especially where there's no father present, that is what's destroying those communities. That's what's destroying the culture. That's what's destroying them. And it's because the men they're not present. But even in a marriage, I see a lot of men that aren't present. They come home and they hit a bottle the first thing when they get home. And then they're, whether they're an abusive drunk or not, it's still abusive, because you just pass out and you're not there for your families. Men need to start being men that are concerned about their family enough that they're willing to put forth the extra work and put down Facebook and go out there into your community and do something to fix it. Or be there for your family. Go take them out. Instead of handing them an iPad, how about you hand them a Constitution and start teaching them about government, so that they know where the role of government is, so that we can protect the future in America, because America's heading out. We're heading in the wrong direction.
And you're going to start seeing a lot of suicide and depression, especially in both. But when you are fulfilling that purpose, when you're out there and you are giving it all to do what you were called to do, that you're out there protecting, you're providing, you're fighting, you're defending, that drives men.
Yeah.
and that will take away depression. That will help with your health when they start doing that. It gives you hope and it gives you joy. And then you don't need to come home and drink because you went out there and you gave it your all. I did this for my family. And then when you come home, then the wife has that same attitude. You know what? I fulfilled what I was supposed to do today. Man, I made sure that I took care of the kid. My husband didn't have to worry about a thing because I was taking care of the kids. I was taking care of the house. They might have a job as well, but they're doing their part. And you're both doing that, all of a sudden you're filled with joy and hope, which helps with depression, keeps you from wanting to do drugs, keeps you want to
Mm-hmm.
do from doing alcohol, because you're fulfilling that need that comes from you serving your wife and your fellow man and your country.
When you're fulfilling your purpose.
Yeah.
I think that's why there's such a suicide epidemic in America, because we don't feel like we're fulfilling our purpose. Well, the media and Hollywood and everybody out there has stripped us of our purpose and confused us to believe that it's something that it's not, and we've just given over to hedonism. We've given over to, our idolatry is now money and the social influencers and everybody else, and when you're not fulfilling that role, you will never feel complete.
Never.
And that's just it. You want your wife to respect you? Go be respectable. Do the things you're supposed to do. Support your family. Be the dad. Be the father to the kids. Yeah, you come home and you're tired and you're exhausted and you go sit down in front of the TV. Meanwhile, you got a kid over here who's saying, I don't know what I'm supposed to do in life. I've got problems, but I don't have a relationship with my dad because he's just off goofing off and watching TV, and he's not really, he's not there. Even though he's present, he's not present. Well, if you're not doing that, how can your wife respect you? How can anybody respect you? It comes from, you got to work hard and you got to defend your family. You got to be a part of what's going on in your community, so you're helping build a strong and safe community for your kids to live in. That requires that extra work. That's the extra. But it's the extra where you gain respect for yourself when you look in that mirror. You spoke about
Absolutely.
these men that the government's beat them down, so you don't blame them for feeling like they're not out there. Well, it's kind of strange, because as the guy doing what I'm doing right now, I look at that and I don't feel that way. I look at the government and the media trying to beat me down as a man, and I just laugh in their face because, I'm supposed to be out here. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
Absolutely.
And
And the more
that's,
they do, and and that comes to the whole full circle again, is people are looking to the government to fix their problems. Oh, and the government, like, yeah, I'll fix your problems. Just give me
Mhm.
more of your tax dollars and let me make sure that, we're oppressing you and trying to fix. And they can't fix it at all. I sit in so many committee hearings and the things that I hear, I thought, this does not belong to the government. This actually is the duty of the church. And because the duty of the church has given it to the government's like, oh yeah, I'll fix it. But you're going to have to, if you want some of your money back that you just paid into me, you're going to have that transgender bathroom. You're going to
That's
to
right.
have this woke ideology. You're going to we're going to, like, sure, give us this money, but to fix you, we're going to, they're not going to fix it. They like to make it worse, because then that's where it keeps the government in control, is by
That's right.
making things worse instead of better. But again, the fix is the people, the fix is the family.
It is. Senator,
Yeah,
we are at an hour and a half. It goes fast.
it does. And I was worried that we would even keep up an hour. So,
So,
yeah.
and last words, I want to give those to you, and just kind of wrap it back around in our legislator. What can we be doing to help you, and what are your biggest concerns coming into this next legislative cycle this year, and what should the focus be? And it's yours.
Well, thank you, Shane. So some of our concerns, we'll see what happens with legislation. It's going to be a fast legislation because then it's an election year. And so everybody's going to want to in quick and get out there. There is a lot of turmoil within the party, where they are looking to unseat the Gang of Eight, because of where we stood and where our votes, when you look at all the different scorecards and stuff, we are always like in the top 8. And so they're looking to unseat that. And it's not just coming from, it's coming from friendlies as well. And so I would have to say that the grassroots is so important. they're going to have the money. We don't have the money that they have, but our last election has proven that grassroots is stronger than money. So you guys need to stay engaged. You need to stay educated in what we're doing. You need to be that mouthpiece, because it's hard. It's expensive to go and have commercials done or send out mailers that people probably don't even read to get our message out. We need you to be that mouthpiece. And if you want representation like you're seeing with us, we need to have that support. But we're also needing more people to consider running, for these. You can't vote in good people if good people are not running. And so you have to consider that. So I would really encourage, all of you to keep up the good fight, and don't think that you're not making a difference. You're making a huge difference. If you were not making a difference, they wouldn't be attacking and wanting to replace the representation that you guys put into place. So keep fighting, get out there, hold up some town halls, call us up and say, you know what, I want to invite my neighborhood. I want to invite my neighbors. Can you come over and share the information that you know? And, just however, I mean, it could be something as easy and small as that. And then also just talking to your neighbors, sharing the information that we put out there, and then encourage people to find out for themselves. Say, don't take my word for it. Go find out for yourselves. Because when they go and look at it yourselves, you're going to see what we're saying is true. And they don't want you to do that. They want you to just listen to what they're saying instead of actually digging in there. So take that time. If you love your state and you love your country, you are the fix you've been looking for, and you need to start just digging in and get your full battle rattle on. It's war out there, and it's hard. It's not for the weak or the lazy, and we need people to rise up, put on your battle rattle, and get out there and fight.
Thank you so much. So, we kind of got into the weeds a little bit off of politics and a little bit more into kind of personal and biblical stuff. But I didn't mind that. And I wanted to, and in fact, I'm glad we went down that path, because it gives you, Idahoans, a look into who Senator Zuiderveld really is as a person, as an individual. And I was hoping that we would have that opportunity here so that you can kind of get to know these people. I'm going to be doing this with more and more of our legislators that are willing to come on here. I don't care who you are. I'll let you come on and talk. If you're on the wrong side of what's happening here, come on. Well, come on here. But I'm not going to hold punches. But at the same time, I want them to get to know you as an individual, because I think we're seeing the true battle is between the battle of good and evil. And that's where we're at in America right now. It's outside of ideologies. It's outside of Republican versus Democrat. It is truly good and evil. And the way that you can discern the difference is take a look at somebody like this. I guess it's over here on your screen. Take a look at somebody like this and see godly women, godly principles that are solid, that are truly trying to represent you as an individual. And even as we're talking about hard subjects that might have certain names that are associated with them, how careful she is to handle herself in a godly manner. And then take a look at the other side and look what's happening. Go on X, go on social media, take a look at them and when they're speaking out and how they're speaking out. It's nasty, it's divisive, it's disgusting, and it is not godly. But yet they are claiming to be of Christ. The fruit is there. The fruit is on the tree. And if you have a good tree, it bears good fruit. This is a good tree, folks. You have my 100% support. You always have, Senator. And thank you so much for coming on here and just letting the people get to know you a little bit and what you stand for.
Well, thank you, Shane. And thank you for putting yourself out there. I know this isn't easy, and it's a cost, so, people support True Idaho News. If you really want to have transparency and the truth, good, bad, and ugly, all of the truth, support True Idaho News, because that's where you're going to get it.
Thank you so much. So Wednesday we have Dr. Daniel Babinski will be back in here, and we'll have the show that probably not the one we intended last week, because it's kind of old news now, but we're getting all the kinks worked out. And again, I say it's a battle between good and evil, and hey, it's just not it's not easy. It's going to be a battle, but Dr. Daniel Babinski, great godly man. Always glad to have him come on here. The emeritus of True Idaho News, if you will. And then we have several other legislators that are going to be coming in, filling in the calendar. I'll be sitting down in the next day or two, getting the rest of that filled in. But I've already reached out to them. They've agreed to come on. And so you can get to know these people yourself and decide for yourself who you want to represent you in the next legislative session. Thanks for coming.